Mr. Emerson, in my 30 years on this bench, I've seen many disputes, but rarely have I witnessed such calculated, cold-blooded betrayal. You didn't just try to evict your brother to get placed.
Most people think the end of a family starts at the funeral. They think it's the reading of the will, the fighting over china sets and old jewelry, that finally breaks everything apart. They're wrong. The end starts years before that, in the quiet, agonizing, lonely moments that nobody else sees. It starts when one person steps up to do the hard, messy, unglamorous work of love, and the other person just steps away. For me, it started 5 years ago. I was 24, just 2 years out of college, working a junior marketing job in the city that I actually loved. I had a small apartment, a girlfriend named Sarah, who I was pretty sure was the one, and a life that was just beginning to take its own shape. I was happy. Then the call came. It was Mom. Her voice, usually so steady, so full of gentle warmth, was shaking so hard I could barely understand her. Dad had been found by a neighbor, wandering 3 miles from the house in his pajamas at 2 in the afternoon. He didn't know where he was. He didn't know who she was when the police brought him home. The doctors at the hospital used words like early onset and rapid progression. They talked about 24-hour care, about safety locks, about the long, slow goodbye. I drove home that night, speeding through the rain, my heart hammering against my ribs. Gary didn't. Gary was closing a massive 8-figure deal in Chicago. He sent a massive arrangement of white lilies that cost more than my car payment. That was always Gary's way. He threw money at problems from a safe distance, so he never had to get his hands dirty with the actual reality of the situation. I thought I was just going home for a few weeks, just to help Mom get settled, to find a nurse, to stabilize things. I didn't know I was walking away from my entire life. I didn't know I was starting a 5-year prison sentence in the home I grew up in. The first year wasn't too bad, relatively speaking. Dad still knew us most of the time. He had good days where he could sit on the porch and tell me stories about building the house in '78, about how he laid every brick of the fireplace himself. But then, the shadows started to lengthen. The good days became good hours, then good minutes. He started forgetting how to use a fork. Then he forgot how to use the bathroom. Mom, bless her stubborn heart, was trying to do it all herself, but she was tiny, frail, and secretly battling her own health issues that she hid from everyone because she didn't want to be a burden. I remember the exact night I decided to quit my job for good. I had come home for a weekend visit. I was still trying to maintain my life in the city back then, and I found Mom sitting on the kitchen floor at 3 a.m., sobbing silently into a dish towel, trying to clean up a mess Dad had made because he couldn't find the toilet in time. She looked so small, so utterly defeated. "I can't do this, Danny," she whispered, not even looking at me. "I'm failing him. That broke me." I called my boss the next morning and resigned. I broke up with Sarah a week later because it wasn't fair to ask her to wait for a guy who was moving back into his childhood bedroom to change his father's diapers indefinitely. I gave up everything. Gary got promoted. He sent Mom a card with a $500 check inside. "For a nurse," he wrote in that sprawling, confident handwriting. $500 wouldn't cover 3 days of professional memory care. But Mom framed the card. She put it right on the mantelpiece. "Gary's doing so well," she'd say to visitors, her eyes shining with a desperate kind of pride. "He's so busy, you know. He's a vice president now." It always stung, that pride. I was there every single day, blending his food when he couldn't chew, washing his sheets 3 times a night, singing him the old Navy songs he still sometimes recognized when the fog cleared for a few seconds. But Gary was the success story. I was just there. I was the expected son, the reliable furniture. By year 3, Dad was gone, even though his body was still breathing. He looked right through me with empty, clouded eyes. He called me nice man when I helped him shave. He called Gary nothing, because Gary was never there to be called anything. He visited maybe twice a year, for 4 hours max. He'd breeze in, smelling of expensive leather and city air, look visibly uncomfortable for an hour, check his gold watch constantly, and then suddenly have an emergency conference call that absolutely required him to leave immediately. "You're a saint, Danny," he'd say on his way out to his rental car, clapping me on the shoulder without ever really meeting my eyes. "Really? A saint. Mom couldn't do it without you. Keep up the good work, champ." Then he'd drive off back to his high-rise condo and his expense account dinners, and I'd go back inside to convince a terrified, angry 200-pound man who didn't know who I was that it was time for his bath. Money became the silent killer in the house. It wasn't something we ever talked about when Dad was well. He was proud, a provider. But dementia doesn't care about pride. It just eats cash. Mom's small pension and Dad's Social Security were being swallowed whole by the medical bills, the special equipment, the endless pharmacy runs. Medicare only covered so much. There was one month about 3 years in that nearly broke me. It was October, and it had been raining for a week straight. I woke up one morning to the sound of dripping water in the upstairs hallway. The roof, original to the 1978 build, had finally given up. Water was pooling near Dad's old study, threatening to bring the ceiling down. I got 3 quotes. The cheapest was $6,000. We didn't have $600. I called Gary. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I had to step out of the pharmacy line, leaving Dad sitting confused in the waiting chairs, just to make the call without him hearing me beg. "Gary, it's bad," I said, trying to keep the desperation out of my voice. "The roof is literally rotting through. If we don't fix it before winter, black mold is going to set in. Mom can't breathe that stuff." I could hear the noise of a busy upscale restaurant in the background. Clinking glasses, loud laughter. "Danny, bad timing," he hissed, clearly annoyed. "I'm with clients. This is a celebratory lunch. We just closed the Omni deal." "Congrats," I said, feeling the rain on my own jacket. "Gary, I need $6,000 today. The roofer needs a deposit." There was a long, heavy pause. I could almost hear him calculating, not whether he could help, but whether he had to. I'm completely illiquid right now, Danny. Everything is tied up in investments and escrow. I can't just pull cash out without taking a massive tax hit. You know how it is. "Nay, you're no virus. What's it?" I didn't know how it was. I had $42 in my checking account. "Gary, Mom drained the rainy day fund 6 months ago for Dad's specialized wheelchair. There is no money left." "Now you are no talk. By me was. Just figure it out, kid. You're resourceful. Put it on a credit card or something. We'll sort it out later. I have to go." "There you are, to always." He hung up. "We'll sort it out later." That was Gary's mantra. It meant I would sort it out now, and he would forget about it later. I didn't put it on a credit card. I didn't have any credit left. Instead, I walked out to the garage. Under a dusty tarp sat Dad's 1967 Mustang Dotto. We had restored it together when I was in high school. It was supposed to be mine one day. It was the last tangible piece of the father I remembered, the strong man before the sickness. I sold it the next day for $8,500 in cash to a guy from Craigslist. It felt like selling a limb. When the guy drove it away, I didn't even watch. I just went inside and paid the roofer. Gary never knew. He never even asked how I figured it out. No clue. Then came Christmas of 2022. The last one. Mom knew it was the last one. You could see it in her eyes, the way she lingered on every ornament she hung on the tree. She begged Gary to come for the whole day. "Just one full day, Garbear," she'd pleaded on the phone, using his childhood nickname. He promised he would. He showed up at 3 p.m., 4 hours late, already smelling faintly of peppermint schnapps. He didn't bring luggage, just an overnight bag. He brought Dad a ridiculously expensive, complicated digital watch that Dad couldn't even figure out how to put on, let alone read. Dad just stared at it, confused, while Gary beamed, waiting for praise for spending money. The watch sat in its box on the mantel until the day Dad died. Gary spent the entire Christmas dinner on his phone, managing a crisis in Tokyo under the table while Mom tried to keep up a cheerful conversation. When she finally asked him to put it away, just for an hour, he snapped. Jesus, Mom, I'm trying to work here. Someone has to pay for all this. He gestured vaguely around the room, at the modest decorations, the food I had cooked. He didn't pay for it. I did. The turkey was bought with the last of the Mustang money. But Mom just shrank back, apologizing to him. That was the dynamic. Gary was the golden prince who was too important to be disturbed, and I was the reliable, invisible servant whose sacrifices were just expected. Dad passed away 3 months later in his sleep. It was a mercy, honestly. But it was also the beginning of the end. Mom, who had held herself together with sheer willpower for him, just crumbled. The cancer she'd been ignoring, the aches she hadn't told me about because she didn't want to add to my plate, had spread. So I did it all again. Another 2 years. Chemo appointments. Hospice care. Sleeping in a chair next to her hospital bed. Holding her hand through endless nights of pain while she whispered about how much she missed Gary. How she hoped he was eating enough in the big city. How proud she was of his big important job. I never hated him for being successful. I hated him for letting me carry the entire weight of our parents' dying days alone. And then taking the credit for being the good son, just because he showed up for the funerals in a nice suit. The funeral was a blur of black suits, overly sweet lily arrangements, and endless casseroles from neighbors I barely recognized anymore. I was running on 3 hours of sleep over 4 days, fueled entirely by bitter coffee and adrenaline. But I remember Gary. Oh, I remember Gary perfectly. He flew in the morning of the service, naturally. First class, he made sure to mention. He wore an Italian wool suit that probably cost more than the entire funeral service. He stood at the front of the church, delivering a eulogy that was a masterclass in fiction. He talked about Dad's unparalleled work ethic, about Mom's infinite kindness, painting a vivid, tear-jerking picture of a close-knit family that hadn't actually existed in a decade. He cried, actual, wet tears streaming down his tanned face, at just the right moments, pausing for effect, letting the congregation comfort him with their sympathetic murmurs. Everyone bought it. Such a good son, I heard Aunt Meredith whisper loudly to her husband 3 pews back. So successful, so busy. Yet he still made time to be here and honor them. Danny's lucky to have a brother like that to lean on. I wanted to scream. I wanted to stand up in the middle of that sacred space and shout that he hadn't made time when Dad was hallucinating at 3 a.m. and I was the only one there to calm him down. He hadn't made time when Mom was too weak to lift a spoon, and I had to feed her broth like a baby. But I didn't. I just sat there, numb, holding the tightly folded American flag they'd given us because Dad was a veteran. Gary hadn't even wanted it. It won't match my decor in the condo, he'd said during the ride to the cemetery. You keep it, kid. The real betrayal didn't happen at the grave, though. That was just theater. The real knife in the back came 2 days later. The last relatives had finally gone home. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It smelled faintly of dying flowers and industrial carpet cleaner. I was in the kitchen, exhausted down to my marrow, trying to figure out what to do with 50 leftover Tupperware containers of lasagna. I heard a car pull into the driveway. Not a rental this time. A sleek, silver BMW Tuple. Gary had evidently decided to stay longer than his usual 4 hours. He didn't knock. He just used his old key, the one that had probably been sitting in the bottom of a desk drawer in Chicago for 6 years. He walked in, bringing a gust of cold air with him. He didn't ask how I was holding up. He didn't offer to help clean up the mountain of dishes. He just walked straight to the kitchen table, Mom's kitchen table, where she'd rolled out pie crusts for 30 years, and dropped a heavy leather briefcase onto it with a loud, authoritative thud. We need to talk logistics, Danny, he said, not making eye contact as he loosened his silk tie, like a man who had just finished a long, tedious board meeting and was ready to get down to real business. Logistics? I asked, wiping lasagna sauce off my hands with a rag. Gary, we haven't even read the will yet. Can we maybe just breathe for a minute? Mom hasn't even been gone a week. I already read it, he said, his voice flat, devoid of the emotion he'd displayed so freely at the church. He pulled a thick stack of legal papers from his briefcase. Dad sent me a copy years ago, right after he got sick. He wanted to make sure things were handled efficiently. It's straightforward. Standard boilerplate for his generation. I get the house. You get the contents, the furniture, the sentimental stuff, the photo albums. I froze. I knew Dad was old-fashioned. He always believed the oldest son should be the head of the family and inherit the homestead. But hearing it said so coldly, so quickly, felt like a physical slap. Okay, I said slowly, trying to process the shift in reality. I figured that might be the case. So, what does that mean? We sell it when the market is right in the spring and split the money? I know you don't want to live here. Gary laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a dry, dismissive sound, like a bark. Split it? Danny, you need to listen harder. Read my lips. The house is mine. And you did great, he said, holding up a hand like he was stopping traffic, his tone maddeningly calm. Really? Gold star for Danny. But that phase is over now. The caregivers aren't needed anymore. You're almost 30. It's time to grow up and get a real life. I've already got a realtor coming tomorrow at noon. I want this place listed by the end of the month. The market is peaking right now, and I have a liquidity issue with a new venture that requires immediate capital. I need this asset liquid. Liquidity issue. Asset. He was talking about our childhood home. The place where we measured our heights on the doorframe, like it was just another stock option he needed to cash out fat. Where am I supposed to live? I asked, my voice barely a whisper now. The fight was draining out of me, replaced by a cold dread. Gary, I have $400 in my checking account. I sold my car. I have no job references from the last half-decade. You know that. He didn't even blink. He just reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a standard white business envelope and tossed it onto the table next to the lasagna. There's $5,000 in there. Cash. Consider it a severance package. It should be enough to get you a cheap apartment and a used beater car until you find something. Maybe retail? They're always hiring. He stood up, smoothing his expensive suit jacket. Oh, and one more thing. Since the realtor is coming tomorrow, I need the place to show well. It smells like a nursing home in here. You've got 30 days to clear your stuff out officially. But, honestly, I'd appreciate it if you were gone by the weekend. Anything left after 30 days goes into a dumpster. I'm not running a storage unit. He walked out the door without looking back. Severance package. He had just fired me from being his brother. Those next few weeks were the darkest of my life. The $5,000 Gary had tossed at me felt like blood money. It sat on the kitchen counter for 2 days before I finally broke down and deposited it. It was barely enough to cover the phone bill, gas for Dad's old truck, and groceries for myself. An apartment deposit was out of the question. A job felt impossible to even start looking for, lost as I was in a fog of grief and betrayal. Gary, meanwhile, was moving at warp speed. The realtor, a woman with a smile too wide and eyes that raked over every worn carpet and scuffed wall with predatory assessment, was there the very next day. She took pictures of my childhood bedroom with my meager belongings still piled in boxes. Pictures of Mom's pristine rose garden, which she deemed unsuitable for modern tastes. You really need to clear out, darling, she'd said, not unkindly, but with a firm professional chill. It's very hard to sell a lifestyle when there's a family living in it. We need to create a blank canvas. A blank canvas. They were going to erase every trace of my life here. Gary would call every other day, not to check on me, but to bark orders. Did you clean out the garage? The developer wants to see the footprint clear. Did you get rid of that hideous floral couch? It's not in the staging plan. He was already talking to developers. He wasn't just selling the house. He was selling the land it sat on, planning for it to be bulldozed to make way for townhouses. My childhood home, flattened. The tree where Dad had carved our initials, uprooted. I walked through the house like a ghost. Every creak of the floorboards, every faded picture on the wall, every scratch on the kitchen counter had a memory attached to it. And now, I was bagging them up, throwing them into black plastic sacks destined for a storage unit I couldn't afford long-term. One afternoon, Gary showed up unannounced. I was trying to pack up Mom's massive collection of porcelain figurines. Each one had a story, a memory of her joy. "What are you doing?" he asked, leaning against the doorframe, his expensive suit pristine, oblivious to the dust and emotional wreckage around him. "Packing Mom's figurines," I said, my voice flat. "They're fragile." He scoffed. "Those things? Nobody wants those. Just donate them, or toss them. The less clutter, the better. We need the house empty." "They meant something to her," I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. He just shrugged. "She's gone, Danny. They're just dust collectors. Look, I'm serious. The developer is firm. They want this lot cleared by the end of next month. That means no house, no trees, no sentimental clutter. You need to expedite." Expedite. He wanted me to accelerate the demolition of my own past. That night, I hit rock bottom. I sat on the floor of my empty bedroom, surrounded by boxes, the walls echoing my grief. The house felt alien, already gone. I felt utterly alone, completely abandoned. I had nothing. No past, no future, and no brother. Gary had effectively erased me, just as he was planning to erase the house. I looked at the boxes. Dad's old toolbox tucked away in the back of the closet. I hadn't touched it since he got sick. Inside, amidst the hammers and wrenches, was a smaller, dusty green metal box. It was where Dad kept all his important papers. The kind of papers Gary would never bother with because they weren't financial. Warranty info, old tax returns from the 70s, a collection of vintage stamps. And then, I saw it. Tucked underneath a stack of brittle, yellowed receipts. A thin manila folder. Its label, typed out on an old typewriter, read simply, "Land Survey 1975. Dad had always been meticulous. Obsessive, even. He'd often say, 'Always know exactly what you own, son. And what you don't. The devil is in the details, especially when it comes to dirt.'" I remembered him saying it when we were fixing the old picket fence line after a winter storm, probably 15 years ago. He'd been explaining some weird arcane quirk of the property, something about how the original plot had been subdivided, then recombined, then subdivided again. I'd been a bored teenager at the time, more interested in my video games. But a fragment of that conversation, a tiny, seemingly insignificant detail, resurfaced from the depths of my memory. Gary was right about one thing. Mom's will left the house to him. The family home located at 14 Maple Terrace. Clear as day. But he didn't own the dirt. Not all of it. Not the part that truly mattered. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up until dawn with that 1975 land survey spread out on the floor, tracing the faded blue lines with my finger. Dad had been a stickler for details, a man who trusted paper more than people. And now, from beyond the grave, he was handing me a lifeline. The survey showed something peculiar. When Dad bought the land back in '75, it was originally two separate adjacent parcels from an old subdivided farm. He'd built the house squarely on Parcel A. But for some reason, maybe a tax loophole back in the 70s, maybe just an oversight that he never bothered to correct, had kept Parcel B, the land that extended under the back half of the foundation and covered the entire sprawling backyard, legally distinct. They were two separate deeds. I frantically dug through the rest of the box until I found Mom's will again. I read it, word for word, my heart pounding. "To my eldest son, Gary, I bequeath the family home situated at 14 Maple Terrace." No, sure. Then I found Dad's old will, the one that covered everything not explicitly named in Mom's more recent one. It had a standard residuary clause. All remaining residue and remainder of my estate, real and personal, shall be divided equally between my sons, Gary and Daniel. Mom's will gave Gary the house. But it didn't mention Parcel B. Technically, legally, miraculously, I owned half that dirt. The next morning, I didn't call Gary. I called Mr. Henderson. He was Dad's old lawyer, a man who had retired 5 years ago, but still kept an office downtown that smelled like old leather and pipe tobacco. He agreed to see me when I told him what Gary was doing. When I showed him the survey and the wills, the old man actually laughed. A dry, rasping cackle that turned into a cough. "Your father," he said, wiping his eyes with a pristine handkerchief, "was a paranoid old coot. God bless him. He hated the idea of banks owning his land. He kept it separate so they couldn't easily foreclose on the whole thing if times got tough. It's a mess, Danny. A beautiful, perfectly legal mess." "Can I stop him?" I asked, leaning forward. "Can I stop him from tearing it down?" Mr. Henderson leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Stop him? Son, you can bury him. He can't sell a house that's trespassing on your land. He certainly can't demolish it without permission from all landholders. But listen to me. Don't tell him yet. Let him dig the hole deeper. Let him commit. Let him spend money he doesn't have based on a sale he can't complete." So I did. For 2 agonizing weeks, I played the part of the defeated little brother. I let Gary bark orders. I let the realtor give me pitying looks as I packed the last of the boxes. Gary was in full shark mode now. He had contractors coming in and out, getting quotes for demolition. He put a massive, gaudy "coming soon" sign on the lawn. My lawn. He was bragging to everyone, cousins, old neighbors, anyone who would listen, that he already had a developer lined up who was going to pay $500,000 cash. No contingencies. He was already spending the money in his head, talking about a new Tesla and a vacation to the Maldives. 3 days before my eviction deadline, he showed up with a clipboard and a smirk. "Final walkthrough, Danny," he said, not even looking at me as he marched through the front door. "Make sure you didn't damage anything on your way out. I don't want to have to deduct from your... Well, you don't have a deposit, do you? Just don't break anything on your way out the door. This is a valuable asset now." I was waiting for him on the porch swing, the same rickety wooden one Dad had built with his own 2 hands, the summer I turned 10. It was one of the few things Gary hadn't tagged for the landfill yet. I sat there, slowly rocking, listening to the creak of the rusty chains, watching the street. I had the last box of my things taped up beside me, a decoy. When Gary finally pulled up, 40 minutes late as usual, he didn't just park. He commanded the driveway. His silver BMW looked obscenely bright against the faded paint of the garage door. He stepped out, checking his phone before he even looked at the house. He was wearing Italian loafers that probably cost more than my car, and they made a sharp, impatient crunching sound on the gravel walk as he approached. He stopped at the bottom of the porch steps when he saw me. He didn't say hello. He just tapped his platinum watch. "Tick-tock, Danny," he said, his voice tight with performative patience. "Realtor's here in 20 minutes for the final walkthrough. I hope that box is the last of it. I don't want to have to hire a junk hauler tomorrow." I didn't stand up. I just kept rocking, slowly. "I'm not leaving, Gary." "No." He stopped dead. The silence stretched for 5 seconds. Slowly, deliberately, he lowered his phone. The arrogance on his face was a physical weight, a practiced sneer perfected over years of boardroom intimidation tactics. "Excuse me," he said softly, dangerously. "I must have misheard you, because it sounded like you said you weren't leaving my house." "I said I'm not leaving," I repeated, keeping my voice level, though my heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "I like it here. It's a nice view. And I'm not done with it yet." He laughed then. It was a short, sharp barking sound that held absolutely zero humor. He shook his head, looking down at his expensive shoes as if he'd just stepped in something unpleasant. Danny, look, I get it. You're grieving. You're emotional. It's hard to let go. But we went over this. You had 30 days. That was a courtesy, by the way. Legally, since you don't pay rent, you're just a squatter. I could have had the sheriff here yesterday throwing your junk onto the lawn. He took a step up onto the porch, invading my space, towering over me while I sat. "Now be a good little brother, pick up your box." I reached into the inside pocket of my cheap denim jacket. I felt the thick, reassuring weight of the envelope Mr. Henderson had prepared. I pulled it out slowly, a crisply folded, heavy-stock legal document, complete with certified copies of the 1975 survey and both of our parents' wills. But you might want to read this first, I said, extending it toward him. He didn't take it at first. He just stared at it like it was contagious. What is this? Your tear-stained diary? Just read it, Gary. He snatched it from my hand with a scoff, tearing open the envelope with impatient, aggressive movements. Fine, wait. If it gets you out faster, I'll play your little game. I watched his face. I memorized every micro-expression. He started scanning the cover letter, his eyes moving fast, dismissive. Then they stopped. He went back to the top of the page. He read it again, slower this time. The arrogant smirk didn't just fade. It evaporated, replaced by a slack-jawed look of genuine confusion. His face went from a flushed, angry red to a sickly, waxy pale as the reality of the legal jargon hit him. I watched his hands, those steady, confident hands that signed million-dollar contracts without blinking, actually start to shake. The papers rattled loudly in the quiet afternoon air. This is bullshit, he stammered, his voice an octave higher than usual. He looked up at me, and for the first time in my adult life, I didn't see the superstar vice president. I saw a scared little boy who realized he'd broken Mom's favorite vase. Dad wouldn't have done this. It's a mistake. A clerical error. You forged this. Dad didn't think you'd try to evict his son 3 days after his wife's funeral. I shot back, standing up slowly to face him eye to eye. And it's no forgery. It's registered with the county. Mr. Henderson checked it 3 times. You own the house, Gary. The bricks, the wood, the shingles. Congratulations. But you're currently trespassing on my half of the dirt it sits on. I took a step forward, forcing him to take a step back down the stairs. Read page 4, Gary. Mr. Henderson was very thorough. The rent for your unauthorized use of my land is retroactive to the date of Mom's death. By my calculations, you owe me about $3,000 already. Oh, and I emphatically do not consent to any demolition or major alterations. If you try to bring a bulldozer onto my dirt, I'll have you arrested for felony destruction of property. Gary crumbled the expensive legal paper in his fist, his composure completely shattering. The veins in his neck bulged. You little parasite. I'll sue you into oblivion. Do you hear me? I have real lawyers, Danny. Expensive ones. Corporate sharks who eat senile, small-town probate attorneys like Henderson for breakfast. I will bury you in so many court fees you'll be begging me to let you live under a bridge. Try it, I said. I had never felt stronger, calmer, or colder in my entire life. Go ahead. Sue me. Let's see what a judge thinks of a rich, absentee executive trying to make his grieving brother homeless just to cover his own bad debts. I hear juries love stories like that. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing. No smart retort left in his arsenal. For the first time, I saw genuine fear behind his eyes. He realized I wasn't just his little brother anymore. I was an obstacle he couldn't just buy off or bully. He turned on his heel, storming back to his BMW, almost tripping on the bottom step in his haste. He slammed the car door so hard I thought the window would shatter. He peeled out of the driveway, gravel spraying everywhere, tires screeching like a wounded animal. I stood there, alone on the porch, holding the last box. The silence returned, but it felt different now. It didn't feel empty. It felt like the quiet before a war. For 3 days, nothing happened. Gary didn't call. No lawyers served me papers. It was just me in the empty house, eating canned soup and sleeping on a mattress on the floor. Then, on Thursday morning, I woke up freezing. I could see my breath in the air. I went to check the thermostat. It was dead. I tried the lights. Nothing. I checked the breaker box in the basement. Everything looked fine. I called the power company. They told me the service had been disconnected at the owner's request. Gary Dottie? He owned the house, so the utilities were in his name. He'd cut the power. 2 hours later, a white van pulled up. A guy in a jumpsuit got out and started messing with the water main at the street. By noon, the taps were dry. He was trying to freeze me out. Literally. I was furious. I drove to the hardware store, bought a generator, 5 gallons of gas, and 10 jugs of water. I wasn't leaving. Not like this. That night I was sitting in the living room, reading by the light of a camping lantern, the generator humming outside, when I heard a heavy truck pull into the driveway. Then another. I looked out the window. It was 11 p.m. Two massive dump trucks were backing onto the lawn. They started dumping construction debris, broken concrete, rebar, old drywall, right onto the front yard. My front yard. I ran outside. Hey! What are you doing? You can't dump that here. The driver, a burly guy who looked like had been in a few too many bar fights, just leaned out his window. Orders from the owner, pal. Said he needed some fill dirt for grading. I'm the owner, I yelled, waving my arms. Get this crap off my property. He just laughed and dumped the second load. It was a mountain of trash, blocking the driveway, crushing Mom's azaleas. Gary wasn't just trying to force me out. He was trying to devalue the property so much that I'd beg him to sell it just to clean up the mess. The next morning, I called Mr. Henderson. He was quiet for a long time after I told him what happened. He's playing a dangerous game, Danny, he finally said. Cutting off utilities to an occupant is illegal, even if they're a squatter, which you aren't. It's called a constructive eviction. And dumping waste? That's an environmental violation. So we sue him now? No, Mr. Henderson said, his voice hard. We document, take pictures, keep receipts for the generator, the gas, the water. Every dollar he forces you to spend is another nail in his coffin. He thinks he's being clever, but he's just handing us ammunition. Let him empty the clip. Gary didn't stop with the utilities or the construction debris. He was getting desperate. I was still there, the generator humming, the jugs of water stacked in the kitchen. My porch, once a quiet sanctuary, now overlooked a small mountain of broken concrete and rebar. A week after the dumping incident, I woke up to a loud banging. Not on the door. It was coming from the side of the house. I cautiously looked out the kitchen window. 2 burly men, neither of whom I recognized, were aggressively tearing down the old wooden fence that separated our yard from the empty lot next door. It was Dad's fence, built stronger than it needed to be, designed to keep stray dogs out and give Mom privacy for her rose bushes. Hey! I yelled, throwing open the back door. What are you doing? That's private property. One of the men, a guy with a shaved head and tattoos crawling up his neck, just gave me a sneer. Owner wants it down. Said it was obstructing the survey line. I'm the owner. That's my fence. He just laughed. Listen, pal. We got our orders. This fence is coming down. You got a problem, take it up with Gary. They proceeded to demolish the fence with crowbars and hammers, smashing it into splinters. They threw the pieces onto my side of the property, adding to the growing pile of debris. It wasn't just property damage. It was a psychological attack. They were literally tearing down the boundaries of my home, daring me to stop them. I filmed them with my phone. Every smash, every smirk. I sent the footage to Mr. Henderson. His response was immediate. Gary's gone from malicious to outright illegal. This is criminal property damage. We're building a case, Danny. Stay strong. But staying strong was getting harder. The constant hum of the generator was a drain. Living without running water, constantly fetching jugs, was exhausting. Every time a car slowed down in front of the house, I jumped, wondering if it was more of Gary's goons, or worse, him. I felt like I was under siege. Then came the anonymous calls. My old burner phone, which I used for basic calls, started ringing constantly. When I answered, it was always a blocked number. Silence. Or sometimes, a distorted voice, whispering threats. Get out of the house, Danny, or you'll regret it. You're not safe there. I knew it was Gary, or someone he'd hired to scare me. He was getting desperate. The developer he'd bragged about had pulled out, scared off by the legal dispute. Gary had a massive bridge loan tied to this property, and he was sinking fast. He needed me gone, and he needed me gone yesterday. One night, I woke up to a loud crash from downstairs. My heart leaped into my throat. I grabbed Dad's old baseball bat, the one he'd used when he coached Little League, and crept down the stairs. The generator hummed outside, providing the only light through the windows. The back door was ajar, and the lock, the heavy deadbolt I'd installed myself, was lying in pieces on the floor. Someone had tried to break in. I ran outside, swinging the bat wildly, but there was no one there. Just the dark, silent night, and the ominous pile of debris on the lawn. Gary wasn't playing games anymore. He was trying to terrorize me out of my own home. He had moved past businesses and into something far more dangerous. He wanted me broken. He wanted me gone. And he was willing to commit crimes to make it happen. But what he didn't realize was that I was already broken. And when you have nothing left to lose, you become incredibly dangerous. After the break-in, I didn't sleep. I sat in the living room with Dad's bat across my lap, jumping at every shadow. But Gary didn't send more goons. He realized brute force wasn't working. So, he switched tactics. He decided to use the system. 2 days later, a white city vehicle pulled up. A man in a reflective vest, carrying a clipboard, walked up the driveway, stepping gingerly over the debris Gary had dumped. He didn't knock. He just started taking photos of the broken fence, the pile of concrete, the boarded-up back door where the lock had been broken. I went out to meet him. "Can I help you?" He barely looked at me. "City code enforcement. Received an anonymous complaint about hazardous conditions. Untended debris, structural damage, potential squatters. Anonymous complaint?" I snorted. "You mean my brother called you? And I'm not a squatter. I'm the owner." "That's a civil matter," he droned, already writing a bright orange sticker. "My concern is safety. This property is a mess. That debris is a rat harborage. The broken fence is a liability. And based on the exterior condition," he pointed at the roof where I had patched it myself after selling the Mustang, "I have reason to believe the interior is also compromised." He didn't even ask to come inside. He didn't need to. He just slapped the orange sticker on the front door. "Notice of condemnation. Unsafe structure. Do not enter. You have 24 hours to vacate," he said, turning to leave. "Or the police will remove you for your own safety." I stood there, stunned. Gary had manufactured a crisis, dumping the trash, breaking the door, and then reported me for it. It was diabolical. I called Henderson. He was furious. "Who was the inspector? Did you get a name?" "Yeah, it's on the tag. Miller, B. Miller?" I heard Henderson typing furiously in the background. "Bob Miller. Of course. He used to be a zoning consultant for one of the developers Gary works with. This isn't a random inspection, Danny. This is a favor. Can we stop it?" "Not immediately," Henderson admitted, his voice tight. "These condemnation orders are powerful. If you stay, they can arrest you. You have to leave, Danny. Just for now. Pack what you can tonight. But don't worry. Gary just made a fatal mistake." "What mistake?" he won. "I have to leave." "No," Henderson said, a cold, hard edge entering. "He didn't win. He just committed fraud. He used a public official to further a private civil dispute. That's corruption, Danny. And once we prove Miller didn't even inspect the interior, we don't just get you back in. We get Gary on criminal charges if we want them." He overplayed his hand. That night was the hardest. I packed a single duffel bag. I took Dad's flag, Mom's favorite photo album, and the deed to the land. I left everything else. As I walked out past that orange sticker, I felt broken. Gary had used his money, his connections, his utter lack of morals to push me out of the only home I had ever known. I slept in my truck that night, parked just down the street, watching my own house like a criminal. I saw Gary's BMW pull up around midnight. He got out, looked at the orange sticker, and I swear, even from 50 yards away, I could see him smile. He thought it was over. He thought he had won. He didn't know that Mr. Henderson was already drafting the subpoenas. I woke up the next morning with a stiff neck and a mouth that tasted like stale coffee. Sunlight was streaming through the windshield of Dad's old truck. For a second, I forgot where I was. Then I saw the bright orange condemnation sticker on the front door of my childhood home, and it all came crashing back. I was homeless, evicted by a piece of paper my own brother had engineered. I drove straight to Mr. Henderson's office. I didn't even shower. I just walked in, carrying the smell of desperation and slept-in clothes. Henderson didn't bat an eye. He was sitting behind his massive oak desk, surrounded by stacks of files that looked like they hadn't moved since the Reagan administration. But his eyes were sharp, clear, and furious. "Sit down, Daniel," he said, sliding a fresh cup of coffee across the desk. "Drink. You look like hell." I drank. It was the best coffee I'd ever tasted. "Did you find anything? Can we get the condemnation lifted? Working on it?" He grunted. "I've got a private investigator, an ex-cop who owes me a few favors, looking into Mr. Bob Miller, our friendly neighborhood code inspector. We'll find the connection. Guys like Miller don't risk their pensions for free. Gary paid him, or promised him something. We just need the receipt." He leaned back, the old leather chair groaning. "But that's small potatoes. Miller is just a pawn. I've been looking at the king." He tapped a thick manila folder in the center of his desk. It wasn't the land survey this time. It was something new. "I had a forensic accountant take a look at your brother's public filings. Gary likes to brag about being a big-shot vice president. But his finances tell a different story. A very desperate story." He opened the folder. It was a sea of red ink. "Your brother isn't just illiquid, Danny. He's drowning. He leveraged himself to the hilt buying that flashy condo in Chicago. He's got 3 maxed-out credit cards, 2 luxury car leases he can't afford, and most interestingly, a massive, high-interest bridge loan he took out 6 months ago from let's call them a non-traditional lender. A loan shark with a letterhead. I stared at the numbers. Millions in debt. "He put the house up as collateral," Henderson said quietly. "What?" "Nuntide. He didn't even own it yet. Mom was still alive 6 months ago." "Exactly. He forged her signature on a letter of intent, claiming she had already agreed to transfer the deed to him before she died. It's fraud, Danny. Bank fraud, wire fraud, elder abuse. If this lender finds out he doesn't actually own the house free and clear because you own half the land it sits on, they won't just sue him. They might break his legs." The realization hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just about greed anymore. It was about survival. Gary wasn't evicting me because he wanted a new Tesla. He was evicting me because he was terrified. He had gambled everything on Dad dying sooner, on Mom dying faster, and on me just rolling over and disappearing. He needs that $500,000 from the developer to pay off the bridge loan before the balloon payment hits next month, Henderson explained, his voice turning grim. "If he misses that payment, he loses everything. His condo, his cars, his job, his reputation. He's cornered, and a cornered rat is dangerous. That's why he escalated to the condemnation. He's running out of time." I looked at the file. I looked at the man who had mocked me for being poor, for having no life while I cared for the parents he was robbing blind while they were still alive. "So we have him," I whispered. Henderson smiled, a cold, shark-like grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Oh, we have more than him, son. We own him. But we don't just want to stop him. We want to ensure he can never, ever do this to anyone again. We're going to let him think he's won for just a little bit longer. We need him to sign the final papers with that developer. Once he commits to the sale of a property he doesn't fully own, he's crossed the line from attempted fraud to complete fraud. That's when we drop the hammer." I woke up the next morning with a neck so stiff I could barely turn my head. The windows of Dad's old Ford truck were fogged up from the inside. For a split second, just before a full consciousness hit, I forgot. I thought I was in my bed, in my room, safe. Then I smelled the stale coffee in the cup holder and felt the cold vinyl of the seat against my cheek, and it all came crashing back with the crushing weight of a physical blow. I wasn't home. I was homeless. I wiped the condensation off the window and peered out. There it was. My house. Our house. It looked like a crime scene, wrapped in invisible police tape. marked with that blazing orange sticker of condemnation. I saw Mrs. Gable from across the street peeking out from behind her curtains, watching me. The shame was hot and sudden. I wasn't just evicted. I was a pariah in my own neighborhood, sleeping in a truck like a vagrant while my brother slept in a five-star hotel bed somewhere. I didn't even try to shower at a gym. I didn't care anymore. I drove straight to downtown to the towering, soot-stained brick building where Mr. Henderson had kept his office for 40 years. Walking into Henderson's office was like stepping back in time. It smelled of old leather, pipe tobacco, and dust. Piles of case files, yellowed with age, were stacked on every available surface, teetering like paper towers. It was chaotic, messy, and utterly reassuring. This was a place where old-fashioned justice was built, one painful page at a time. Henderson was sitting behind his massive oak desk, looking like a gargoyle carved from granite. He didn't say hello when I walked in. He just gestured to the leather chair opposite him and slid a steaming styrofoam cup of black coffee across the polished wood. "Drink," he grunted. "You look like something the cat wouldn't even bother dragging in." I wrapped my hands around the warm cup, trying to stop them from shaking. "Did you find anything? Can we get the condemnation lifted? I can't stay in the truck another night, Mr. Henderson." "Working on it," he said, his voice a low rumble. "I've got a private investigator on it. Good man, ex-cop. Owes me more favors than he can count. He's digging into Bob Miller, our friendly neighborhood code inspector. Men like Miller don't just randomly decide to condemn perfectly good houses on a Tuesday afternoon. They need motivation. Usually green motivation. We'll find the connection. Gary's sloppy when he's desperate. And he's definitely desperate." He leaned back, the ancient springs of his chair groaning in protest. "But the condemnation hat's just a symptom, Danny. That's small potatoes. I've been looking at the disease." He tapped a thick, ominous-looking manila folder sitting squarely in the center of his desk blotter. It wasn't the land survey this time. It was something new, something heavy. "I called in another favor," Henderson said, his eyes hard and bright behind his wire-rimmed glasses. "Forensic accountant. Used to work for the IRs. Now he helps me nail guys who think they're smarter than the calculator. I had him take a very deep, very quiet look into your brother's finances. Gary likes to play the big shot vice president, doesn't he? Drives the right car. Wears the right watch. Yeah?" I said, the bitterness rising up again. "He loves the show." "Well," Henderson said, flipping open the folder to reveal a sea of red ink and highlighted numbers. "It's a hell of a show, because according to this, your brother is broke. In fact, he's worse than broke. He's drowning." I stared at him, unable to process it. "What? But the BMW, the condo in Chicago, leased." Henderson spat the word out like a curse. "Leased to the hilt. He's maxed out on 3 platinum credit cards. He's behind on his condo association fees. And 6 months ago, right around the time your mother took her turn for the worse, he took out a massive, high-interest bridge loan from a hard money guy. Legal, technically, but they don't send friendly reminder letters when you miss a payment. They send guys who look like the ones who tore down your fence." He slid a specific document across the desk to me. It was a loan application. I scanned it, the numbers blurring until one line jumped out at me. "Collateral. On." "He put the house up as collateral," I whispered, my blood turning to ice. "Read the date, Danny," Henderson commanded. I looked. It was dated 8 months ago. Mom was still alive. She was sick, bedridden, but alive. "He didn't own it," I said, my voice shaking with a new kind of rage. "How could he use it as collateral if he didn't own it yet?" Henderson pulled another sheet from the file. It was a letter, typed on plain paper. It was a letter of intent, stating that our mother, being of sound mind, had agreed to transfer the deed to Gary immediately upon her death, bypassing probate, in exchange for his continued financial support of her care. At the bottom was Mom's signature. I stared at it. I knew Mom's signature better than my own. I had watched her sign checks with a trembling hand for the last 2 years. This signature was firm, steady. It was the signature of a healthy woman. "He forged it," I said. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. It wasn't just greed anymore. It was a felony. He forged her signature while she was dying in the next room. Exactly, Henderson said, his voice cold and sharp as a scalpel. Bank fraud, wire fraud, elder abuse. If this lender finds out that his collateral is essentially worthless because you own half the land it's sitting on, and now because it's tied up in a forgery investigation, they won't just sue him, Dan. They'll destroy him. He needs that $500,000 from the developer not to buy a Tesla, but to pay off this loan before the balloon payment hits next month. If he misses it, he loses everything. His job, his condo, his reputation. He is a cornered rat. That's why he escalated to the condemnation. He's running out of time, and you're the only thing standing between him and total ruin. I sat back, the enormity of it washing over me. I looked at the file. I thought about Gary at the funeral, crying his fake tears, knowing he had already sold our mother's legacy to a loan shark. So we have him, I said. We can stop him right now. Henderson smiled then. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who just found wounded prey. Oh, we can do better than just stop him, son. We can end him. But we have to be smart. We need him to commit all the way. We need him to sign the final closing papers with that developer. Once he accepts money for a property he knows he doesn't fully own, based on a forged document, he's crossed the line from attempted fraud to complete, undeniable criminal fraud. That's when we drop the hammer. We're going to let him think he's won for just a few more days. The hardest part wasn't living in the truck, it was waiting. Henderson said we needed Gary to feel completely safe, totally victorious, so he would sign the final closing documents with the developer. If we moved too soon, he might just back out, pay a small penalty, and we'd only have him on attempted fraud. We needed him to cross the finish line. So, I played my part. I let myself look defeated. I parked my truck down the street where I knew he'd see it when he drove by. I didn't shave. When he finally called me, 3 days after the condemnation, his voice was dripping with fake concern that barely masked his triumph. Danny, I heard about the condemnation, he said, sounding like he was trying not to laugh. Terrible luck. Really. Are you okay? Where are you staying? In the truck, I rasped, making my voice sound broken. I don't have anywhere else, Gary. The bank won't let me access the $5,000 because I don't have a fixed address now. That's unfortunate, he said. Look, I'm closing with the developer on Friday. Once that money hits, I'll see if I can, I don't know, maybe throw you another $1,000 to get you on your feet. But you have to promise not to cause any trouble at the closing. I don't want you showing up there begging. I won't, I said. And it was the truest thing I'd ever told him. I won't be there. While I was playing the beaten dog, Henderson's private investigator, a guy named Russo, who looked like he ate gravel for breakfast, was busy nailing down the other end of the conspiracy. He'd been tailing Bob Miller, the code inspector. On Thursday night, just hours before Gary's big closing, I was sitting in Henderson's office again when Russo walked in. He didn't say a word. He just tossed a manila envelope onto the desk. It contained grainy, but unmistakable, surveillance photos. They showed Gary and Bob Miller sitting in a corner booth at a dive bar way out by the airport. In one photo, Gary was sliding a thick white envelope across the table to Miller. In the next, Miller was tucking it into his jacket, a smug grin on his face. Bingo, Henderson whispered, staring at the photos like they were a masterpiece. We got him. Bribery of a public official. That's a felony for both of them. Miller will flip on Gary in about 5 seconds to save his own pension. He looked up at me, his eyes gleaming. Tomorrow's the day, Danny. Gary is going to walk into that title company office thinking he's about to become a millionaire. He has no idea he's walking into a meat grinder. Get some sleep, son. You're going to need your strength for the main event. Friday morning didn't just dawn gray. It felt heavy, like the air itself was pressurized. I woke up in the truck for the last time, my back screaming in protest. I had $50 left from Gary's severance money. I drove to a thrift store as soon as it opened and bought the only suit that remotely fit, a charcoal gray jacket that was too tight in the shoulders, and trousers that were too loose in the waist. It smelled faintly of mothballs and someone else's cologne, but it was armor. I wasn't going to face him looking like a victim. I was going to look him in the eye as an equal, even if my suit cost less than his socks. I met Henderson outside the title company's flashy glass and steel office building at 9:45 a.m. The closing was scheduled for 10:00 sharp. He handed me a heavy, expensive-looking leather briefcase, not his usual battered one, but a sleek new one he must have bought just for today. "Inside," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial amidst the bustle of downtown, "is everything. The original 1975 survey. Sealed. Your father's will, the forensic accounting of Gary's debts, the surveillance photos of the bribe, and the coup de grace. A signed notarized affidavit from the notary Gary used for Mom's letter of intent. Turns out she's his ex-girlfriend, and she wasn't too happy when Russo showed her Gary's recent credit card statements detailing jewelry purchases for someone else. She flipped faster than a pancake. We have him on forgery, Danny. Cold. I took the briefcase. It felt incredibly heavy, like I was holding a loaded weapon. My hands were sweating. Are you sure about this? If we do this now, there's no going back. He's my brother. Henderson put a hand on my shoulder. He stopped being your brother the minute he forged your dying mother's signature to pay off a loan shark. He stopped being your brother when he dumped trash on your lawn. Today, he's just a defendant. We wait until they're all in the room. Gary, the developer, the lawyers, the bank representative. We wait until the pens are literally in their hands. We want maximum exposure. We want every single person in that room to see exactly who Gary really is when the mask slips. We stood in the lobby, watching the digital elevator indicators. At 9:58 a.m., the doors slid open and Gary walked out. He was beaming, practically floating on a cloud of anticipated wealth. He was chatting animatedly with a slick-looking older man in an expensive Italian suit, the developer, presumably. They were laughing, shaking hands, two masters of the universe, about to close another big deal. Gary didn't even see me standing in the corner by the potted ficus. He was too busy looking at the top floor, at his future. "All right, son," Henderson said, buttoning his trench coat like he was preparing for battle, his eyes hard. "Let's go ruin a rich man's day." The conference room on the 40th floor was all glass and polished chrome, designed to intimidate anyone who didn't have a seven-figure net worth. Gary was already seated at the head of the long table, flanked by the developer, Mr. Sterling, and a small army of lawyers. When Henderson and I walked in, the air in the room changed instantly. It went from celebratory to confused. "Danny?" Gary asked, his smile faltering. "What are you doing here?" "I told you. I'd handle the money later. He's not here for a handout, Mr. Emerson," Henderson boomed, his voice filling the room. He didn't wait for an invitation. He walked straight to the table and slammed his heavy briefcase down in the center, right on top of the unsigned closing documents. "Who are you?" Mr. Sterling asked, looking annoyed. "I'm the man who's about to save you $5 million, Henderson replied, opening the briefcase. Gary stood up, his face reddening. "This is ridiculous. Get out." "Security." "Sit down, Gary," I said. It was the first time I'd ever given him an order in my life. It felt good. Henderson began to lay out the documents, one by one, like a winning poker hand. First, the 1975 survey. "Gentlemen," Henderson began, addressing Sterling's lawyers, "before your client purchases this property, you might want to know that the seller, Mr. Gary Emerson, does not in fact own the land it sits on. My client, Daniel Emerson, holds a 50% undivided interest in Parcel B." Gary laughed, a nervous, high-pitched sound. "That's nonsense. It's an old survey. Mom's will supersedes it." "Does it?" Henderson asked, pulling out the second document. "Dad's will, because your father's will is quite clear about residual assets. But that's just a civil dispute, right? We could argue that in probate court for years." He paused for effect. "But this isn't civil. This is criminal." He slammed down the forensic accounting report and the surveillance photos of Gary bribing the code inspector. The developer Sterling leaned in, his eyes widening as he looked at the grainy photos of Gary handing over the envelope. Gary went deathly pale. "Where did you get those?" That's an invasion of privacy." "It's evidence of a felony, Gary," I said, my voice steady. "Bribery, fraud, and let's not forget this." I pulled out the final document myself. The affidavit from the notary, his ex-girlfriend. "You forged Mom's signature while she was dying, Gary. You used a house you didn't own to secure a loan you couldn't pay. And today, you were about to commit wire fraud by selling that same house to Mr. Sterling here without disclosing the lien or the true ownership." The room was dead silent. Every eye was on Gary. He looked like a rat trapped in a corner, sweating, his eyes darting around the room looking for an escape that wasn't there. Mr. Sterling stood up slowly. He looked at Gary with pure disgust. "Is this true? Did you forge the title documents?" Gary stammered. It's complicated. It was a family matter. We were going to work it out." "It doesn't look complicated to me," Sterling said, buttoning his jacket. "It looks like you tried to defraud me of $5 million. He turned to his lawyers. "Killed the deal and called the district attorney. I want to know if attempted fraud applies here." As Sterling and his team walked out, Gary slumped into his chair, completely destroyed. "But I wasn't done. We're not just stopping the sale, Gary," I said. "We're suing you for everything." Gary didn't just roll over. He doubled down. 3 days after the disastrous meeting, I was served with a lawsuit. He was suing me for tortious interference with a business contract, claiming my fraudulent assertions had cost him the $5 million deal. He demanded $5 million in damages. It was a terrifying, scorched earth tactic designed to bankrupt me before the truth could ever see a courtroom. For 6 agonizing months, it was pure hell. Gary's high-priced lawyers buried us in mountains of paperwork. They demanded every email I'd ever sent Mom, every grocery receipt from the last 5 years, trying to paint a picture of me as a financially incompetent leech who had manipulated our parents. They dragged me through 8-hour depositions, asking the same insulting questions over and over, trying to get me to crack. But Henderson was a fortress. He countered every motion with a calm, relentless fury. He subpoenaed Gary's bank records, his emails with the hard money lenders, and his text message logs from the weeks leading up to the condemnation. The turning point finally came during Gary's own deposition. He sat there, smug in his Italian suit, answering every question with a practiced, "I don't recall," or "That's a question for my financial advisors." He thought he was untouchable. Then Henderson slid a single piece of paper across the polished conference table. It was a grainy photocopy of a cashed check. $5,000 made out to cash, dated exactly 1 day before the condemnation notice appeared on my door. The memo line, written in Gary's distinct, jagged handwriting, read simply, "Consulting fee BM, Bob Miller, Dr. Mr. Emerson," Henderson said, his voice dangerously quiet in the acoustically sealed room. "Can you explain to me why you paid a city code inspector $5,000 in untraceable cash exactly 24 hours before he condemned your brother's home based on an exterior-only inspection?" Gary turned a color I'd never seen before, a sort of sickly greenish gray. He looked desperately at his lead lawyer, who was suddenly very busy arranging his papers, refusing to meet Gary's eye. The lawyer knew a sinking ship when he saw one. I, Gary stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate me." He pleaded the fifth. In a civil deposition. It was blood in the water. It was an admission of guilt so profound, it practically echoed. Henderson leaned in, his eyes cold as ice. "We're done here. I'll see you in court, Gary. And I suggest you bring a toothbrush. You might not be going home to your luxury condo afterwards." The trial was a spectacle. Gary, desperate to salvage his reputation, had hired a new legal team, the kind that specializes in high-stakes crisis management. They tried every trick in the book. They argued that the 1975 survey was outdated, That Dad had been senile when he wrote his will, that I was a bitter failed son, looking for a handout. But then, we called our first witness. It wasn't me. It wasn't Henderson. It was someone Gary had completely forgotten about. Mrs. Gable, our next-door neighbor for 30 years. She walked to the stand slowly, leaning on her cane, but her eyes were sharp. She had seen everything. "Mrs. Gable," Henderson asked gently, "can you tell the court what you saw on the night of November 14th? "I certainly can," she said, glaring directly at Gary. "I saw that boy, Gary, drive up in his fancy car. I saw him take a crowbar to his father's fence, and then I saw him kick in the back door of the house. I called the police, but he was gone before they arrived." Gary's lawyer jumped up. "Objection! Hearsay! Identification is unreliable at night." "I've known Gary since he was in diapers," Mrs. Gable retorted, her voice echoing in the courtroom. "I know exactly what he looks like, and I know what a snake looks like, too." The jury loved her. Gary just sank lower in his seat. We were chipping away at his armor, piece by piece. Mrs. Gable cracked his armor, but it was our next witness who shattered it completely. Henderson called Sarah Jenkins, the forensic accountant. She was a small woman with sharp glasses and a voice that tolerated absolutely zero nonsense. She didn't just talk about Gary's finances. She dissected them on a projector screen for the jury. "Mr. Emerson's public persona is one of wealth," she began, pointing to a laser-projected balance sheet. "But the reality is a house of cards built on extreme leverage. As of the date of his mother's death, Mr. Emerson was insolvent by approximately $3.2 million. A gasp went through the courtroom. Gary stared at the table, his face a mask of pure misery. Jenkins continued, relentless. "He has 7 maxed-out credit lines. His Chicago condo is in pre-foreclosure. But the most critical piece of evidence is this." She pulled up a document, the bridge loan from the hard money lender. "This is a high-risk, short-term loan for $500,000, taken out 8 months ago. The interest rate is a staggering 28%. Dodge to what? It had a balloon payment, meaning the entire amount plus interest was due in full exactly 30 days after his mother's funeral. If he missed that deadline, the penalty clauses would essentially bankrupt him instantly." Henderson stood up, walking slowly toward the jury. "So, Ms. Jenkins, in your expert opinion, did Gary Emerson need to sell his parents' house immediately?" "It was his only option for financial survival," she stated flatly. "He had already spent the projected proceeds before he even had the deed." Then Henderson dropped the final bomb. He held up the letter of intent with Mom's forged signature. "Ms. Jenkins, did your analysis find any evidence that Gary Emerson ever provided the financial support mentioned in this letter?" "None," she said. "In fact, I found the opposite. Over the last 5 years, Gary Emerson borrowed, and never repaid, a total of $45,000 from his parents' retirement accounts. He wasn't supporting them. They were supporting him." Gary's lawyer tried to object, but it was weak. The judge was staring at Gary now, not with impartiality, but with something that looked a lot like disgust. The golden boy was finally tarnished beyond repair. Mrs. Gable had cracked Gary's armor with her eyewitness testimony, but it was our next witness who shattered it completely. Henderson called Sarah Jenkins to the stand. She was a forensic accountant, a small woman with sharp, wire-rimmed glasses, and a voice that tolerated absolutely zero nonsense. She didn't just talk about Gary's finances. She dissected them on a massive projector screen for the entire jury to see. "Mr. Emerson's public persona is one of extreme wealth," she began, using a laser pointer to highlight sections of a complex spreadsheet. "But the reality is a house of cards built on extreme, almost reckless leverage. As of the date of his mother's death, Mr. Emerson was technically insolvent by approximately $3.2 million. A gasp went through the courtroom. I looked at Gary. He was staring at the table, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated misery. His high-priced lawyers were furiously scribbling notes, trying to find a way out of the trap. Jenkins continued, relentless. "He has 7 maxed-out platinum credit lines. His Chicago condo is currently in pre-foreclosure due to 6 months of missed association fees. But the most critical piece of evidence regarding his motivation in this case is this document. She pulled up a new slide, the bridge loan from the hard money lender. This is a high-risk, short-term loan for $500,000, taken out exactly 8 months ago. The interest rate is a staggering 28% annually. It had a balloon payment clause, meaning the entire principal amount, plus accrued interest, was due in full, exactly 30 days after his mother's funeral. If he missed that deadline, the penalty clauses would essentially bankrupt him instantly, seizing all his remaining assets. Now, pardon me. Henderson stood up, walking slowly toward the jury box, letting the weight of that information sink in. So, Miss Jenkins, in your expert professional opinion, did Gary Emerson need to sell his parents' house immediately? It was his only viable option for financial survival, she stated flatly. He had already spent the projected proceeds from the sale before he even had the deed in his hand. Then Henderson dropped the final bomb. He held up the letter of intent with Mom's forged signature, the document Gary had used to secure that predatory loan. Ms. Jenkins, you reviewed this document, correct? It states that Mrs. Emerson agreed to transfer the house to Gary in exchange for his continued financial support of her medical care. Did your analysis find any evidence of such support? None whatsoever, she said, adjusting her glasses. In fact, I found the exact opposite. Over the last 5 years, Gary Emerson borrowed, and never repaid, a total of $45,000 from his parents' retirement accounts. He wasn't supporting them. They were supporting him. But Gary's lawyer tried to object, stammering something about relevance, but it was weak. The judge overruled him immediately, staring at Gary now, not with judicial impartiality, but with something that looked a lot like undisguised disgust. The golden boy was finally irrevocably tarnished. Gary's lawyers tried to stop him from testifying. I could see them arguing in hushed, angry whispers at the defense table. But Gary, in his infinite arrogance, believed he could charm his way out of anything. He thought he was smarter than everyone in the room. He took the stand, smoothed his tie, and smiled that practiced, salesman's smile at the jury. For the first hour, under gentle questioning from his own lawyer, he spun a tragic tale. He talked about how much he loved our parents, how overwhelmed he was by grief, how he only wanted to sell the house to preserve its value for the family estate. He almost believed it himself. Then, Mr. Henderson stood up. He didn't start gently. He walked right up to the witness stand, holding the forged letter of intent. Mr. Emerson, you testified just now that your mother signed this document on October 14th, correct? Yes, that's correct, Gary said, his smile tight. October 14th, Henderson repeated, checking his notes. Interesting, because according to her medical records, which we have subpoenaed, your mother was in a medically induced coma on October 14th due to complications from her chemotherapy. Can you explain to the jury how a comatose woman signed a complex legal document with such a steady hand? Gary froze. The color drained from his face. I might have the date wrong. It was a chaotic time. Chaotic indeed, Henderson said, pulling out another document. Let's talk about chaos. Let's talk about the $5,000 you paid to Bob Miller the day before he condemned your brother's home. Was that also a result of chaos? That was a consulting fee. Gary snapped, his cool facade cracking. I needed advice on zoning. Zoning advice paid in cash? In an envelope handed over in a bar parking lot at midnight? Henderson raised an eyebrow, turning to the jury. Is that standard business practice in your industry, Mr. Emerson? It happens, Gary mumbled, sweating now. And finally, Henderson said, delivering the knockout blow, let's talk about the bridge loan. You testified that you intended to share the proceeds of the house sale with your brother. Yet, this loan agreement, which you signed, explicitly states that 100% of the sale proceeds would go directly to the lender to satisfy your personal debts. Were you lying to the lender then, or are you lying to this court now? Gary opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked at his lawyers, who were staring fixedly at their desks. He was alone, trapped in a web of his own lies. No further questions, Your Honor, Henderson said, walking away as Gary sat there, ruined in front of everyone. The weekend before closing arguments, things got weird. I was staying at a cheap motel near the courthouse. Henderson insisted it was safer than the truck. Saturday night, I got a knock on the door. It wasn't Gary. It was a kid, maybe 20 years old, looking terrified. He handed me a manila envelope and ran off before I could even ask his name. Inside was a single cassette tape and a note written on hotel stationery. He's going to try to burn it down tonight. 2 a.m. Don't go alone. Nelly. I called Henderson immediately. He called the police. At 2:15 a.m., we were sitting in an unmarked police car across the street from my childhood home. Sure enough, a dark sedan pulled up, headlights off. A figure got out carrying a red gas can. It was Gary. He was going to torch the house. If he couldn't have it, no one could. And the insurance money would solve his immediate cash flow problems. The police waited until he had poured gasoline on the back porch before they turned on the lights. He didn't even run. He just dropped the can and stood there, defeated, illuminated by the red and blue strobe. The next morning in court, Henderson didn't need closing arguments. He just played the police dashcam footage for the jury. Gary, in handcuffs, sobbing, admitting everything to the arresting officer. The judge didn't even wait for the jury to leave the room before revoking Gary's bail. "Mr. Emerson," he said, his voice shaking with controlled fury, "you have not only wasted this court's time with a frivolous lawsuit, you have attempted to destroy evidence and commit arson during an active trial. You are remanded to custody immediately." Gary was dragged out of the courtroom in handcuffs, still wearing his expensive Italian suit, now smelling faintly of gasoline. It was over. The golden boy hadn't just fallen. He had doused himself in fuel and lit the match. The final verdict, when it came 3 days later, was a complete and total annihilation of Gary's life. The judge didn't just rule in my favor, he threw the entire book at my brother. He awarded me full ownership of the house, citing Gary's fraudulent attempt to secure the deed. He awarded me punitive damages of $4.5 million, an amount specifically chosen to equal the fraudulent deal Gary had tried to make with the developer. He also referred the case to the district attorney for criminal charges regarding the forgery, the bribery, and the attempted arson. Gary didn't just lose the case. He lost everything. The bridge loan he had taken out went into default the next day. His creditors swarmed like piranhas. His flashy condo in Chicago was foreclosed on. His BMW was repossessed. He was fired from his vice president job the moment the news of his arrest hit the papers. I saw him one last time, about a month later. He was out on bail, looking 10 years older, wearing a cheap, ill-fitting suit that looked a lot like the one I had bought at the thrift store. He came to the house to pick up a few boxes of personal items the court had allowed him to keep. He stood on the porch, looking at the place he had tried to destroy. "You happy now, Danny?" he asked, his voice bitter and hollow. "You ruined my life." "I didn't ruin anything, Gary," I said, leaning against the doorframe, finally feeling at peace. "You did this to yourself. You bet everything on the idea that I was too weak to fight back. You forgot one thing Dad always taught us. Never build your house on someone else's land." He didn't have an answer to that. He just picked up his box and walked away, a broken man with nothing left but his debts. Moving back in was strange. The house was still quiet, still full of memories, but the heavy, suffocating weight of Gary's greed was gone. I spent the first week just sitting on the porch swing, drinking coffee out of Mom's favorite mug, listening to the birds instead of the roar of dump trucks. It took me 6 months to fix the fence. I did it myself, board by board, just like Dad had taught me. Every nail I hammered felt like reclaiming a piece of my history. People ask me if I ever forgave Gary. The answer is no. Some things are beyond forgiveness. He didn't just try to steal a house. He tried to steal my past. He tried to erase the only home I had ever known because he needed quick cash to cover his own mistakes. But I did learn something. I learned that sometimes you have to fight dirty to get clean. I learned that the quiet ones, the caregivers, the ones who stay behind, we have teeth, too. We just don't show them until we have to. Gary is still out there, somewhere, probably trying to scam someone else. But he'll never step foot on this land again. This dirt is mine, and it always will be. And so the gavel fell on Gary Emerson. He thought his money and his suits made him untouchable. He thought his brother's kindness was a weakness he could exploit. He learned the hard way that the quietest people often have the loudest victories. This is just one file from the Vindication logs. There are thousands more. Stories of people who were pushed to the edge, who faced impossible odds against tyrants in their own families, workplaces, and neighborhoods, and who found a way to fight back. We want to hear from you. What did you think of Danny's strategy? Did Gary get what he deserved, or did he get off easy? Let us know in the comments below. Your insights help us uncover the next great story of justice served. If you have your own story of vindication, a time when you turned the tables on someone who tried to crush you, send it to us at the email in the description. Your story could be the next file we open. And finally, if you believe that sometimes you have to fight dirty to get clean, subscribe to the Vindication logs and click that notification bell. You don't want to miss what happens next. Until then, keep your receipts and never let them see you coming.